This is Duke University.
And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce the moderator for our panel, Hardy Vieux. Hardy is a Duke 1993 graduate. While at Duke, he was president of the Student Government Association. He went on from there to the University of Michigan, where he earned his law degree and a graduate degree in public policy. Hardy served in the United States Navy, in the Judicial Corps. He clerked for a United States Federal District Judge. He's an amazing individual. It's been very difficult to follow him as president of your Alumni Association. He's probably one of the finest leaders I have ever encountered. Hardy has been recognized for his tremendous public service. He was the 2010 winner of the DC Pro Bono Lawyer Award. He's led no less than 3 humanitarian relief missions to Haiti. And he is truly one of the finest individuals I've ever gotten to know. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and friend, Hardy Vieux.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here. We're going to be informal for most of this panel. I'll start off with some formal introductions, and then we're going to cut right to the chase and speak to our panelists today about failure and risk-taking. So joining us today, I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Wilhelmina Reuben-Cooke. Professor Cooke is a Duke Trustee Emerita. She's class of 1967 and one of the first 5 African-American undergraduate students to matriculate at Duke. And so as we celebrate this 50th anniversary of the first 5 undergraduate students at Duke, we have Professor Cooke to thank for the path that she blazed for many of us. So it is an honor to be here have her here with us today. She is currently a professor at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law, where she was the 2011 recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award, which was sponsored by the Duke Alumni Association. And the award honors Duke graduates who have made significant contributions in their field in service to the university and for betterment of humanity. It is the highest award granted by our Alumni Association. Professor Cooke has served as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at UDC. She served in that post from 2003 through 2007, and she began her teaching career in 1986 at Syracuse University College of Law, where she became the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in 1992. And she holds a law degree from the University of Michigan Law School, so I've done my best to follow in her path as much as I possibly can. To her right, we have Ambassador Stuart Jones, class of 1982. Ambassador Jones is the United States Ambassador to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Ambassador Jones is a career member of the United States Foreign Service and was sworn in as the United States Ambassador to Jordan on July 21st of 2011. He previously served as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the American Embassy in Baghdad, and from 2008 through 2010, he returned to the Department of State as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, with the responsibility of overseeing operations in Balkans and in the EU. From 2005 through 2008, he served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the American Embassy in Cairo, Egypt, and Ambassador Jones has also served as the Government Coordinator in Al-Anbar Province, Iraq, and on the National Security Staff as Country Director for Iraq. After earning his degree in history from Duke, he went on to earn his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and now has the honor of having his oldest son, Thad, be a sophomore here at the Pratt School of Engineering. I'm told Thad is awake and alive and with us today. So I don't know about you, Wilhelmina and Stu, but when you get a call from Duke asking you to speak on a panel about failure, you kind of, I guess, there's a moment of pause, and I guess you say thank you. So nonetheless, here we are. And I think there's a lot to be learned on this topic. So Stu, why don't we start with talking about failure and risk-taking. Let me first start with, I remember a commercial in the 1990s featuring a famous athlete from the university down the road, and in that commercial, this athlete is walking into an arena, and there's a voiceover, and you hear him say, "I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been entrusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. And I failed over and over again in my life. And this is why I succeed." So let's starting off with Michael Jordan's quote. I mean, I'm sure that has some resonance with you, Stu. When you think about failure and success and risk-taking, how are they all put together? How are they all connected?
Thanks, Hardy. First, let me just say how delighted I am to be back here at Duke. I'm so impressed to see an auditorium filled with Duke students. I have to admit that, as Sterling Wilder, our distinguished alumni director, would tell you, that if this conference had been offered in my era, I probably wouldn't have made it here. But I wish I had, though. And so thank you all for coming. And I'm so honored to be here with Wilhelmina and also you, Hardy. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. You know, as I was preparing for this, and I looked at Wilhelmina's a tremendous resume, and I realized that she's the one here to talk about risk-taking, and I'm the one to talk about failure.
Very gracious.
But of course, you're right. I mean, and the Michael Jordan quote is a great tee-up. I think anybody who is committed to success and is committed to trying to achieve something in their career, of course they're going to have setbacks and failure and disappointments. And, you know, I think, of course, you guys in the audience face, I think, a different set of circumstances that Wilhelmina and I faced when we were coming out of Duke. I think you're coming into a very competitive environment, and there's a tremendous pressure on you to show perfection. And Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, came through Amman a few months ago, and he talked about his new book, and he talked about the tremendous competitiveness of the world economic market and the world career market. And so I know what's going through your minds, but I still think that there has to be room for you to allow yourselves, you need to allow yourselves the room to fail, to try for things that might be out of your comfort zone, to try for things that are not automatically expected, and also to, I think, to at some point defy your parents, defy your mentors, defy others to follow your own bliss. My grandfather, who was a distinguished foreign service officer, when I graduated from law school, begged me not to join the Foreign Service. He thought it was a terrible idea because he knew that coming out of law school, I had the opportunity to make a lot more money and have a much more stable living than I've had as a Foreign Service officer. But I can't imagine doing anything differently than what I've done. So part of the risk-taking and part of the failure is branching out on your own and taking those choices. And I always talk about my experience in Anbar in Iraq in 2004. When we got out there, of course, and this is not, I'm not going to talk about the politics of Iraq and all that, but when we got out there, we were clearly unprepared. And my job as a civilian was to try to organize a civilian team to establish assistance channels and to build up the local governance. And we had lots of resources. I was there with the U.S. Marines. It should have worked, but it was a failure. It was a failure because the insurgency was mounting, and it was mounting right in the province where I was located. So that in the time I was there, I went from being able to drive myself down to the governor's office in my own Suburban to not being able to make that drive downtown because it was so dangerous. And I wish I could say that it was my idea then to exploit our connections to the tribes, which later became what we call the awareness movement, which inspired the tribes to push al-Qaeda out of Anbar. But I wasn't. In fact, I said we should not work with the tribes. They're very anti-democratic, and they're autocratic, and they're corrupt. But the experience of that led to subsequently much more effective civilian interaction in Iraq over the next 8 years. So that by the time I came back in 2010, that part of the code had been sort of broken. And again, I don't want to say that it's smooth sailing in terms of Iraq going forward, but the idea of how to work with the communities in a way that was effective, we made great strides based largely on my failure in 2004. So, so that's sort of, I think, a framework to think about these things, that any failure is going to ultimately to lead to improvement of performance and institutional memory.
Well, I mean, how do you define risk and risk-taking? And I'm sure the students would love to hear, well, how do you deal with it when it all goes wrong? I mean, when you've got to deal with the rejection at the day's end, how do you sort of process through some of that when you've taken the risk and it didn't work out the way you had hoped?
Well, I think a part of it is that when I think of risk, it is that I know it's not going to be a slam dunk. And I love the fact that you started with the Michael Jordan story, because I think it was Wednesday, and I was thinking, oh, a panel about success and failure. And the commentator said, Michael Jordan, I don't know whether it's true or not. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school team. Is that correct? That's correct. And that spurred him on. And for me, that's telling. I'll start with the saying, you can't walk on the water if you don't get out of the boat. And that's how I think of risk-taking. That when you expose yourself to risk, there's a chance that you might not make it, that you might fail, you'll be vulnerable. But within that is also opportunity, because opportunity is the chance to make something of a situation and create a success. So when it happens, and it happens to all of us, I'm going to do a little digression because I see Sterling there, and there were people, there were more people invited to be on this panel than are here, and it's kind of, you sit there and you think, do I really want to be on a panel about success and failure? But you can talk about it because as a result of that situation, you've moved on. And so I like the fact that the topic was changed and it is bouncing. It's bouncing back. So your failure can propel you to a different level. And what does it take? No joke. It's painful going through it. It's because we have moved from it that we can talk about it. But if you use that opportunity first to reflect, to think what happened. I have a spiritual mentor who always said that pain is a powerful instructor, that we only grow and learn as a result of pain. We don't invite it into our lives, but it's the one thing that makes us stop. When things are going well, we tend not to be reflective. And so if we reflect on what happened, if we are able to see the lessons we learned from it, Thomas Edison says, I failed my way to success. If we can make a distinction between failure as a person and failure as an act, which is temporal, and then move from that and learn and develop, then it becomes something that moves us forward. I think failure gets defined differently at different stages. When you're going through it, it feels like failure. If you use it and you look back, it feels like education, instruction, incentive, motivation.
Stu, we heard Wilhelmina mention mentors. I mean, have your advisors and mentors been advocates for risk-taking? I mean, you mentioned members of your family with regard to the Foreign Service, but when you don't get that sort of advice that you were hoping for, how do you overcome it? How do you approach it? What's the process for thinking through that risk-taking?
Yeah, of course, mentors for all of us, I think, are very important. And, I still have mentors today at my advanced stage of life. And so I think Wilhelmina would agree that it always makes sense to have around you a group of people who believe in you and recognize your gifts, but also have high expectations and hopes for you. And having those conversations can be very useful. Frequently, in my case, I will be more critical of my own performance than my colleagues or my mentors. And, they'll say, look, you need to raise your own expectations, and it's not as bad as you think it is. And in that regard, they push me to out of my comfort zone. I'll say something like, well, I don't think I'll be, in the Foreign Service, we lurch from job to job in 3-year cycles, so you go back and forth between Washington and abroad. And of course, coming back to Washington is sort of a drag, because then you come back and you start dealing with the bureaucracy, but you have to come back to Washington to sort of re-up and then just sort of get sprung back. So we constantly talk to each other about what jobs we're going to be sort of aiming for back in Washington or back abroad. And, you know, if I have a tendency to sort of limit what my scope could be, my good mentors will say, no, you could get this other thing. You should go for it. And then we have the problem of going in and asking for it. And so you're in a very awkward position of going into somebody's office and saying, you know, I know you might not think I'm ready for this, but I think I'm ready for it, and I would like this job. And so through your mind, you know, in your mind, you're thinking, this person thinks I'm a jerk, because I'm obviously self-promoting, and there's 100 other people who might be more qualified for the job than me, and yet I'm here. And I actually had that experience. I mean, even, again, I mean, I know you guys go through this. I just talked to Cameo in the career office, and she was saying how you guys don't like to do this. And I don't like to do it either, but I had to do it even this week, you know, because even I have to think about onward assignments and things. So, yeah, but absolutely, the mentors in that regard can be very helpful in sort of saying, you know, sort of kicking you into pushing into those uncomfortable meetings, into those uncomfortable encounters.
Wilhelmina, is risk-taking something that really only appeals to people who are risk-seeking? I mean, how about if you're a student here that you look around and say, I'm not a risk-seeking person, perhaps I gravitate more to being risk-averse. Then what? I mean, is it then risk is not something for you and you should back off?
No, I think when we say risk, it doesn't mean being foolhardy. I think you kind of evaluate, why am I doing this? You might think of it in a different way instead of saying, say, I'm goal setting. Okay. If I'm goal setting, it means that I have to move from here to there. There's always that gap. Will I make it or not? I'm goal setting. But if you don't goal set and you stay in that comfort zone, you don't grow. And if you goal set, then you develop new skills, et cetera. There's this wonderful book, The 4 Agreements, and one is, you know, don't make assumptions. I love what you were talking about. Don't make assumptions, you know. Go ahead, ask the questions. Don't assume you can't do it. Don't assume someone thinks that you can't do it. You know, always do your best, and don't take it personal. Okay? Don't take it personal. So if you set goals, then you open yourself up, and you take risks. But it's not foolhardy. It's in search of something that you want to achieve.
I remember when I came to Duke and I was certain that I wanted to go to law school, I basically was in search of the formula. I knew that there was some sort of formula to success. And whatever that formula was, I was bound to determine, get it down, and execute on it. And so probably in doing that, I played it incredibly safe. I remember when I was running for student body president, someone said, your flyer should say something along the lines of, vote for Hardy, he's nothing if not safe. And I was like, well, thanks. So Stu, in terms of that formula, listening to, you know, for the students here, how do they step back from that formula? I mean, I think for most of these students, they've been incredibly successful in their lives, and they're thinking, I want to make X, I want to get to point X, so maybe I need to do A, B, and C. What would be your advice to some of the students in the group?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, by the way, did you use that slogan?
No. I had good mentors and advisors.
So, well, one should never be a person who sort of reads the autobiographies of millionaires and billionaires, because they're notoriously untrue. But one thing that does sort of, one common vein that runs through them is that none of these guys started out expecting to make $1 billion. They started out pursuing a passion. And I don't think you can calculate your way to success that brings you happiness. I think that you have to, I mean, calculation should be part of it. And as Wilhelmina says, we're not talking about reckless risks, but I think you have to find something that excites your passion, that takes you where you want to go. And do the things that make you happy. And when you are happy, you will be successful. And when you are successful, this creates new and great opportunities. I always think of my friend, Chris Stevens, who was the American ambassador who was killed in Benghazi a few weeks ago. And Chris was a diplomat who had a passion for retail diplomacy. He was always out in the streets. And he, as a young man, he graduated from college and went straight into the Peace Corps. And sort of this, his retail sort of disposition and attitude that he sort of developed in the Peace Corps, he was a very elegant Arabic speaker, carried him through his career. And he was always a guy, and there were several times when I tried to get Chris to take a more corporate job in the Foreign Service that would have been, frankly, more career-enhancing in the long term. And he always spurned it for a job that brought him more into contact with people in Jerusalem and then ultimately in Libya. And as you know, he transformed the political atmosphere in Libya, really with the power of his own personality. And that's why after he was killed, there was such a strong outpouring of sympathy and regret among the Libyan people, because they knew the contribution he'd made. But that was his passion, and he became ambassador at a relatively young age, following his passion.
Well, back at Duke, are there skills that you gained here that have helped you in terms of managing your ability to evaluate risk and determine what's a sensible one for you to take, and also dealing with the failures that you've had to deal with along your career?
Yes, I think a part of resilience from failure is the belief that it doesn't define you, it's that particular situation. And so I think one of the things that Duke did for me, and I think it does for students here, is it gives you good preparation. You have opportunities for success. You build self-confidence. The other thing that is well, I was going to say it's truer now, but as I reflect on it, I would just say it's different. When I was at Duke, I had to learn how to navigate difference, how to deal with, you might say, I'd say diversity, and you'd say, but what kind of diversity is there? It's far more diverse now. But I was the one person, and so everyone else was different. But then I also learned that out of those differences, there was commonality. I learned about trying to create comfort in an uncomfortable situation. And I learned about change and flexibility and growth. I could see people change and grow. I could see myself change and grow. And I came to understand that just because it's this way right now, it doesn't have to stay that way. I can change it, and what I can't change, I can learn to work with. I think Duke taught me that.
And so as you, well, I mean, in terms of your life's narrative, and I know a lot of students might be thinking about that as they either think through resumes or LinkedIn bios, how does failure fit into that? Or do you leave it out of that? I used to always say that when I look at my bio, for every sentence that there is of something successful, there are paragraphs of failure that are just not on that page. But I still would say that and there are a lot of paragraphs. And I would say that that's really key to the narrative. So how do you fold that in? It's part of who you are, and it's an important part of the telling.
I think you don't tell it so often unless you're invited to a panel, or because you've been wildly successful, and like the millionaires, I write the book, and I create all these obstacles. And I think you define yourself differently. I'm looking around at name tags, and I can't see as well, but I also know that mine seems to be in a decade that's very different than others. So I'm in a stage in my life when I'm looking back. And when I was in college, I think what I set as goals, I haven't reached. I was going to be head of this, run this, and all of that. Does that mean I'm not successful? What I have learned is it's about passion. I didn't plan my career, and so I'd feel like a fake if I said I did X, Y, Z, and I meant to get here. My husband laughingly said once, he says, Wilhelmina, you're the only person I know who gets jobs with increasing responsibility and less money, and you just love it. And I think you do what you enjoy doing, and things tend to open up. Oh, insight, the book I was talking about. It says, there are things you do, always do your best. And I think that's the thing about failure. If you do your best, you learn something, don't judge yourself harshly, and you never know when those skill sets and those experiences prepare you for something you never saw on the horizon. Very different. And then you go with that, and if it feels right, you work it as long as it feels right. And then sometimes the discomfort can be saying, as I have been told, you know, maybe you'd like to look for a job someplace else, you know. And then sometimes it comes when you are doing well in the job, but it's not right. You know, that's the discomfort, and you need to move. And then you find yourself at different places. And then when I look back, what I can say is that I've enjoyed doing what I did, because if I didn't have specific goals, I had ideas about what I wanted my life to be, and I think that has occurred in terms of trying to make a difference, you know, in different ways.
Stu, some of these students will graduate and start looking for their first jobs, and some of them, depending on the economy, may not have that ideal job offer. That sort of vision that they have for themselves may not actually link up with the offer that sits in front of them. What then? Is that when you default to passion? I mean, that's sort of a moment of truth. How do you process a moment like that when you say, I went to Duke to be X, and they want me to do Y?
Well, first, let me just say that I think that what Wilhelmina has just said in her last few remarks are really powerful, and I think very, very useful. And I agree that I have a friend, Bill Cohan, who graduated in '81, and he says, you know, if you feel like you're not in the groove, you're not in the groove. And I remember taking, when I was in New York in '94, I was a staff aide to Madeleine Albright when she was at the UN, and then she came back to Washington. And she generously offered me a job on her staff, which of course is a big deal for a Foreign Service officer to go work for the secretary. But I was already paneled to go to Turkey. And it was a big dilemma, because it was, my gut and my heart was saying Turkey, but by all accounts, the money was with the job in Washington. And we ended up going to Turkey, and I later learned that this decision was very much respected. And sort of the daily grind of Washington, I think at that stage of my career, after having done it for 2 years already in New York, probably, I don't think I would have grown so much. And I think so, being willing to walk away from the obvious career opportunity for something where your gut's saying, you know, to do something differently, I think it's a very worthwhile issue to explore. Not always, and we don't always have such great choices after all. You know, I think there's a sense of you Duke students that when, you know, that you've already made it, that everything is going to be great for you, and you've managed your academic career so magnificently up till now, and you're going to continue to manage things. But, you know, adversity, in truth, sometimes, in many cases, you've already addressed adversity, and if you haven't yet, you will in the coming years. And I think, and maybe that adversity will rear its head when you're looking for a job this time, or maybe it'll rear its head if you lose that job in a few years. And I think, again, what it comes down to is getting a strong network of people around you who know you, who you trust, who will give you good advice. It's making sure that you can meet your personal obligations to your family and to anybody else who you feel that obligation to, and then, but also just to sort of create another set of options, to not assume that you have to go in a certain way. There are always, you know, especially for you who are also well educated now, and you clearly very gifted, you know, you have more options than you probably think. And stepping back and exploring those options, I think, can be a very, very worthwhile exercise. And you always have more time to explore those options than you think you do.
As you were talking about learning from your experiences and growing from it, I remember years ago I had a criminal matter. I was representing a young woman who had fatally stabbed her mother many, many times. She did this at the age of 14 and had gone through a trial and had gotten something like a 35-year sentence. And I got brought in later on to do the retrial. And I literally had no arrows in the quiver. I mean, I just didn't know what to do, and I ended up contacting the family of the mother who had been killed, and thinking that I might be able to persuade them to come to court and basically say something along the lines of, she was young then, she's a different young woman now, we forgive her. And I found this family in West Virginia, drove up there, literally knocked on the door unannounced, and short of slamming the door in my face, they said, well, we had no idea that this young woman was going to have a retrial, so thanks for the alert. And we'll come down and testify against her. So that didn't go so well. And they showed up at the trial, and the prosecutor never knew that the family was in the audience, and so never called the family. And so I sort of dodged the bullet in that they never testified. And afterwards, so we lost the case, and the 35-year sentence was never changed. And I went back to my client in the cell afterwards, and I said, I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, I played a big card here, and it didn't work out our way, and I'm sorry I let you down. And she said to me, perhaps you should redefine success differently. And this is a girl who's now 18, and I said, I'm not sure I follow. She said, well, for the first time in my life, someone advocated for me. Someone argued for me. And when you went up to West Virginia, you went to bat for me, and no one's ever done that before, and so this is a success. And so that's one of the things I took away from that failure, is that I've learned to redefine, maybe it's the line of work I am as a criminal defense lawyer, but you learn to redefine success in all that. I'm wondering about grit. I mean, we've heard a lot of it in the press lately. I remember there's a book by Paul Tough, an educator, that talks about the importance of grit in education. Do you see, Stuart, do you see grit as being a part of this whole sort of mixture? I mean, is that one of the benefits that comes from taking these risks and perhaps not coming through? I mean, what role does grit play into all of this?
That's a great question. You know, there's a piece in the New York Times this morning in that Motherlode column about having kids who are nervous and having kids who are not nervous, and how hard it is to, when you have a kid who is, you know, feels the pressure a lot, either in sports or in exams, and how you can coach the kid to address those kinds of anxieties. And what I decided at a young age was that since I didn't think I had a lot of grit, that I needed to have a lot more life experiences so that I would get some sort of perspective on things. So I just found myself, just trying to push out of what everyone sort of expected the right channel should be. And that included, you know, going to boarding school instead of staying in my public high school. It meant, you know, going and cutting fish in Alaska one summer. It meant doing performing arts. I mean, just, you know, just pushing out and trying to find different kinds of experience that other people didn't have. And I hope that would invest me with a level of grit. And I'm not sure it worked, but it was useful for other things. So I think, you know, you got to have heart, you know, and, but I think it comes down to what Wilhelmina was saying before, is that, you know, it's not always about you, and don't take your job seriously, not yourself. And, you know, just, you know, if there's something you want, if you go after it, and just sort of try to push out all the distractions. What do you think?
I agree. I think that to be able to, the value of not having things go your way is that you learn they don't have to go your way all the time, and sometimes they will, and you can move from it. You know, the understanding is that if I fall down, I can get up, because I've done it before. And I've gotten up, and I've sometimes moved to better places. And also, examining those times when you didn't do it. You know, there are times when I have spent so much time regretting what I didn't do that I couldn't see what I could do now, you know. And you can let that consume you. So I think the big thing is the understanding that you can bounce back. You know, I can bounce back.
Well, you talked about not all risks are sort of created equal. I mean, when you look at a risk how do you process through what's a sound risk for you and one that just is foolhardy? I mean, what's the framework you use to go through that?
I'm not so scientific. Having a framework, you know.
Is it a gut?
Sometimes it's gut. What I have also, in thinking about this, it is in part, why do I want to take the risk? Okay, why do I want to take the risk? Do I want to take the risk because I think other people expect it of me, or think I should? Is it something I really want to do? Is it worth it? You know, why? And I think where that gets you is kind of, and that's one of the values of not having things go your way all the time, is it causes you to be more reflective about yourself, who you are. What's driving me? And I think as long as you are honest with yourself, and that's hard, then you can say, I did it for these reasons, okay? It worked out, it didn't work out, okay? I did it for the right reasons, even if I had unexpected results. If I did it for the wrong reasons, that's when it really hurts. That's when it hurts. Yeah, that's when it hurts.
Well, let's turn to the audience. I mean, you've heard about reflection. I'm sure many of you have had a chance to reflect on some of the comments you've heard here today. Questions, things that have provoked your thinking. So the question is, so how do you address the question, and especially in an interview setting, of what is your greatest weakness?
Oh, in an interview setting. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's.
But not just limited. Just not limited to.
I can do that.
Not limited to. Right.
I would say, so of course in a job interview, you always present it as a secret strength. What I always say is, I really need to work on my impatience. I need to, sometimes I get so focused on what I'm doing, and I get so engaged that sometimes I tune out other things, and I need to be, more patient and more, and have a broader perspective. That's what I say in job interviews.
Let's see. I don't have many. I haven't had many job interviews. I'm not very good. One I do use, and usually there's a grain of truth. You have flipped it, and mine might be that my weakness is that I like to. Sometimes I try too often to make things work, to accommodate people, to reduce conflict. And sometimes you have to be very focused. You have to make tough decisions. But what they get from that is this is someone who will work in a group, will try to bring people together, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But I also understand that that's a strength and a weakness, and it is a real one for me that I have. And then maybe if I'm real honest, I say, what's your greatest weakness? Not wanting to have any weaknesses.
Called awareness.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky because I married my wife, who was also a Foreign Service officer. So we had already both sort of committed ourselves to this path. And even though she's come in and out of the Foreign Service because she wanted to focus on child rearing at various times in her career, she's always been game for the task. And it's true that, and that's not true of all Foreign Service officers. And we're on a panel this afternoon with two of my colleagues later this afternoon, and I think one of the very difficult things about entering the Foreign Service is how you manage the family piece. Because it was one thing that my wife and I recognized was that we had to show a very united front to our kids, that this was how we were going to go through life, and there's some people who grow up on a farm in Iowa, and, that's the life of those kids. And, maybe they would rather be the kids of an investment banker in New York, but guess what? You grow up in a farm in Iowa. And our kids grew up in a Foreign Service family, and that's how it was going to be. And, once they can get off on their own and they can make their own choices, that's up to them. But that's our vocation. And for the most part, it's worked. But, we thought a lot about, going to places with healthy environments. Beijing is a magnificently fascinating professional challenge, but I didn't want to take my kids to Beijing because I was worried about just the air pollution. And we did go to Cairo, which also has a very significant air pollution problem, and some of the families' kids came up with respiratory problems. So there's a lot of elements that go into these decisions that are very painful and cause you to question yourself.
Wilhelmina, did you want to add to that about how risks sort of affect, you know, the people around you, those closest to you, and the decisions that you make and the implications it may have for?
Just that I think the importance of choosing friends and spouses and significant others carefully. People who want the best for you. Also communicating so that there are no surprises. And I think the hard part is addressing the hard questions, because you don't want the risk of getting the wrong answer, but you're going to get the answer at some point in your life, so you might as well get it early on. So, you know, I think you spoke of your network, the people around you. Choose people who are supportive, but who also are great for reality checks, and I think that's all you can do.
So examples of risks that panned out poorly, worse than you thought it would, or better than you thought it would. Do you want to go first?
You know, ladies aren't always first when they're trying to think of a risk. No, I'll take one. I'll take one. I'll take the one that panned out well. Let's imagine going first. When I left law firm, Wilmer & Cutler, the question was, where do you go? And I had a couple of choices. One was, this is one that worked out well. Had an opportunity, because I had taken this pro bono case, it was a felony murder, and since I didn't have a whole lot of work to do with the firm then, you know, I really worked on it and so forth, and we had all the resources of the firm, so I took it up to this level, took this up, and so I came to the attention of, I guess, the head of the Assistant Attorney General. So I got an offer from them when I started looking around. That would have been safe, and the route in Washington, you do that, you can be a judge and do certain things. But then I was really kind of disenchanted with law too. And I called up a friend in Michigan, and he had just gone over to start, not to start, but to head Citizens Communication Center. And I said, I'm job hunting, and I need a recommendation. They've asked me about this, you know, would you write it? And he said, well, why don't you think about us? And I thought, huh? You know, a little group of lawyers, public interest, funded by Ford. I was coming from a big firm, you know, you look up less money, but it also did flexibility, and I kept thinking, And then he said, well, you know, check us out. So how do you do the risk? You know, I went to Citizens. It was the best thing I could have done. I worried about the status. I worried about how I could move from it. As it turned out, because we were just like the little lawyers, we had no senior partners. I ended up being able to manage my cases. I worked with citizens groups, my passion for social reform and change, and I got experience. I argued an en banc case in the DC Circuit, a Supreme Court case. Most lawyers go through their entire lives and never get that opportunity. I did it at 30 because there was no one else to do it. It was just, but as it turned out, it ended up being the best thing for me. I ended up going into law teaching, and I don't think I could have done those things had I stayed in the firm. They never would have been open to me. And in fact, my Supreme Court argument, the person who mentored me and groomed me at Wilmer was on the other side. So it was interesting.
Terrific example.
Yeah.
Stu?
Well, so you have three lawyers on the panel, and all of us have agonized whether we should have gone to law school or not. So I think one of the, at various times in my career, I've regretted and not regretted having gone to law school. And at the time, you know, I was a history major. After Duke, I went to teach at a boarding school for a year, but it was time to get on with life. My parents were on my back. They said, come on, and I'd taken the LSAT, and so it just seemed like an automatic thing. It just seemed like an automatic thing to do. In fact, not a risk-taking. And I just sort of fell into it. And then, you know, I had a very good law school experience, and I made a lot of good friends, and I learned a lot. I improved my mind, and then I got to the law firm, which was, of course, the next natural step that you were, you know, and it was starting to seem like everything had already been scripted. And I looked at these guys in the law firm, God bless them, and they were magnificent lawyers and also great members of their community. But I just couldn't see myself in that. I just couldn't see myself in that life. And so one of the perks of going to one of the big law firms in those days is that after you take the bar, they sort of give you an unlimited amount of time to go on a walkabout. And I traveled all around Latin America for about 8 weeks. And I had a magnificent experience. And this was during the time of the civil wars in Central America. And I had friends down there doing political work. And I went to Peru, which was a very fascinating time. And I came back and I realized that, I really enjoyed the travel. And one of the things about, being in the law firm was that people take really good vacations. They work really hard, but they take really good vacations. But I didn't want to go on vacations. I wanted to live in these places. And then, and that's what led to the Foreign Service decision. So, I think, which was then a departure from what was, clearly a very promising and safe sort of path. And, the Foreign Service, as I said, is not for everyone. It's really a vocation. There have been many, many times when I've seriously considered walking away, but it turned out to be the right thing. And of course, all my law school classmates and all my colleagues at the law firm were just, gobsmacked that I would leave this promising job to go do something that was so aberrational and risky. But, when we get together now, and they're all very successful and prosperous and happy people, but they're really fascinated by what I do. Don't do what I did. Because I did steer away from classes that I thought would be hard to get A's in. And, looking back, I mean, what a great, all the opportunities I missed. I don't know how you rectify, because I probably wouldn't have gotten A's in, and then, probably would have affected grad school. But as I say, looking back, who cares what law school you end up going to, or who cares? It's all about what you achieve on your own. So I think limiting career, academic choices is just a, it is part of the game, I know, but it's a shame.
Agreed. I took zoology on West Campus with Peter Cloughlin. Why I did that, I don't know. I think you should take your risks, evaluate them carefully. But I'll tell you what I learned. It was understood then, I was in the women's college, that you took, if you're going to med school, you took it on West Campus. But if you're not going, you wanted to take it, you took it on East Campus. Well, I was going to do it on West Campus. I was not interested in med school. Why did I do that? I did not do well. Okay, I did get the C. I could never see anything through the microscope. It was an awful, awful experience. I felt really bad. But I said, I failed. This is a failure, but I am not a failure. So I moved on. But it taught me something, looking back. And it was that you can work really hard at something and not get the A. You can do it. You can invest a lot of time and energy and not get what people see as the success. And sometimes that happens and you just move on, and you take another class that evens out the C and you move on. I will say that the things that I regret from my Duke experience is that I was so programmed. I felt I was going to law school, and so I majored in political science. I think I would have loved anthropology. I regret to this day I never took psychology. There were certain things that I wish I had taken, in part because they seemed to spark an interest, but I thought I had to do X, Y, and Z, and they didn't fit in what people expected to see. And those are the things I regret. Those are the things. And I don't regret the hard course. I don't regret taking an Ann Scott or a Harold Parker and doing the work. But I do regret some of the things I did not do because it didn't fit neatly in the package of what you assumed you did if you majored in this.
I think for me, I think I had the benefit of good advisors and mentors that would nudge me when I got a little too comfortable. When I was an undergrad, I had been involved with DSG and lots of other things, and I applied to several law schools and was focused on going to Duke's Law School. And I went to see Dean Wilson about trying to get a recommendation, and he basically said to me that you have no business going to Duke Law School. And I was like, I think I could hack it. And he said, no, he said, you're just going to do the same things that you've always done. You're going to be incredibly comfortable. And so in his office that day, he said, you know, the law school for you is nowhere near here. It's in Michigan. And I was like, I don't even know where that is. And I listened, though. I had the good sense to listen. And before I left his office, he had picked up the phone, called the dean of admissions, and said, where is this guy in your process? If he's not in your yes bin, he should be. And I walked out of there with a yes to the University of Michigan Law School, went sight unseen, and it was the best decision ever. And then when I got there, I took a class, I think it was like something like indigent, providing legal services to indigents. And it was an easy class for me. I nailed it, and I got my final paper back, and I knew I had nailed this paper. And the professor put A, and he put an asterisk next to it. And he said, and on the bottom he put, come see me. And so I went and saw, I'll never forget him, he used to be the mayor of Ann Arbor. And I said, so, you know, I got an A, what's up with the asterisk? And he said, that's called wind aided. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And he said, you got that A because it was an easy A. You took this class because you knew you could get an A. And so you said exactly what I wanted to hear on that paper. So you shouldn't feel very good about that A at all. So asterisks still make me cringe. But it led me, I was in policy school at the same time, and I was sort of sleepwalking through policy school, and it sort of forced me to think things through in a different manner. And so I started taking classes that I was avoiding. I was learning disabled, I'm dyslexic, and so I stayed away from econometrics, and I said, you know, it's time for me to try it and see what happens. I can get support, it may not be easy. And I took a lot of those classes and learned a lot. And now I'm in the point in my career where I'm doing a career change. I was laid off not long ago. Not easy to say, but it happens. And now I'm looking to do work in this international development sector. And I'm relying on those policy classes that I forced myself to take because Professor Harris forced me and he pushed me in the right direction. So that channel, that sort of domino effect has served me well. But it has been incredibly uncomfortable at times. But like Wilhelmina and Sue have said, being uncomfortable, you sort of get comfortable, and you learn things about yourself in those moments that you would have never dreamed of. And oftentimes it's some pretty amazing things.
Well, one of the things about great risk is, you know, the rewards factor. But also, I was thinking, you take great risk and you don't make it, people say, well, that was tough to do. So it's okay, but if you take little risk, people are going to go, oh, you should have made that. You know, so there's perhaps some comfort in taking the big leap and really trying. I've read someplace, you know, it's a whole thing of your reach should exceed your grasp. You know, if you go out for it, where you end up is going to be better than where you started. If you don't reach very far, you won't get very much. And so, again, you know, how much do I want it, and why do I want it?
You know, of course, one thing, too, is that, you know, a risk for one person is somebody else's comfort zone. And the same comfort zone for somebody else is their risk. You know, in the Foreign Service, now I've taken these 2 tours in Iraq. And so when I was in Iraq the second time, rockets hit my house. And, you know, I'd actually been rocketed the first time, too, so I sort of knew and when these little rockets, they come in, I know it sounds bizarre, but they really have to hit you on the head. You know, they come in and they have a very short little area of impact. So if you've been around the rockets, it doesn't, you know, you don't sweat it that much. But when you tell people that you've been around the rockets, they say, oh my God, you know, you must be crazy, or you must have a high risk potential. But, you know, I don't have a big high, I just know how the rockets work, you know. So, you know, so I think the key is, but if you're not taking any risks, you really then you find other people controlling your life. And you may find that you're not really in control of your own choices, and your people then can direct you. You know, now that in my so now, of course, in the Foreign Service, there's a group of people who I try to advise and mentor who are behind me, and I frequently try to get them to do something that I think is really a good idea for them. And I think for them, part of the risk is to say, no, I don't want to do what you want me to do. I want to follow my bliss in another direction. Thank you very much. So, because there's always going to be, especially for such a talented group of people, there's always going to be people telling you, here's your next great opportunity, let me help you with this. And you judging that and sometimes disembarking from that path can be the real risk. Well, first of all, I would say don't take anything that I've said to not suggest that some of those natural path jobs are tremendous training and opportunities. Going into an engineering job or a law job where, a lot of people are going through that experience, that's because, the reason why a lot of people go through that experience is because it's worthwhile and you learn a lot. And so, so sometimes the danger is not between now and that job. The danger is between, and the opportunity is between that job and the next one, because that's when you start to carve your own path. So don't beat yourself up. If you get a great offer from Google, I mean, that's a great training ground, and people have done some wonderful things at Google and gone on to other great things. And that's part of the great thing about the American economy, which the rest of the world has now sort of woken up to, which is that we have such an ability to move and change and remake our careers. If you go into your first job at a firm in Cairo, your chances, you're never going to leave because that's where it's just not done, and there's very little mobility. But that's the great thing about our economy and about 21st century America. So again, just don't beat yourself up for taking a somewhat traditional path right after school, because that can be a great training opportunity.
And remember, we're talking about the exceptions to the rule. We define our lives in terms of successes rather than failures. Most of our life is not risk-taking. It's when you're doing this and then you step out. We don't go from risk to risk to risk. You need a little time to settle in and do the core things.
So I think we can say that the period of 2000, after the initial invasion of Iraq, the period between 2004 and 2006 was a failure for U.S. policy. Again, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it was very interesting to see how in the U.S. military certain voices started to emerge and say, hey, you guys, the emperor has no clothes, we're not succeeding here, I know that's not the political message at home, but if we don't get our act together, we're going to, the consequences are very, very terrible for us as an institution and for the lives of our soldiers. And what you saw is some very courageous individuals coming out in military journals and blogs, sort of articulating these things. And I often wondered if I had been, because I had some of the same thoughts, and I wasn't really sure how to convey them or what the right institutional framework would be in the Foreign Service. And we did, I think, we went through our own examination in a more private way. But I think somebody has to stand up and acknowledge, hey, we're seeing failure here. And that's exactly, by the way, what's going on in terms of our policy on Syria today, which is for many months we sort of said, oh, really, there's no way that Bashar Assad can continue in this way. He's going to have to collapse. And then, lo and behold, here it is several months later, and he hasn't collapsed. So so a lot of people are now stepping up saying, hey, our policy of delivering humanitarian assistance into Syria has so far been a failure. Now we need to look at new avenues. And I think being one of those people to sort of stand up and acknowledge that it can be very difficult. It's very difficult in the military setting. But the people who do it you have to admire that courage and respect that contribution. And I think that's how you turn the ship. And having people in your institution who are willing to do that and take that risk is incredibly valuable. And I think one of the things that when we go through Foreign Service training is they always tell us to make sure that we have a really diverse team, that you have people who are not going to subscribe to groupthink. And I think that's a lesson I've taken in every job, to always have some skeptics on the team to challenge orthodoxy.
And when I was, after the earthquake in Haiti, I went to Haiti with a medical relief team based here in Durham, and it was probably about 2 weeks after the earthquake, and when we arrived, it was still complete chaos there, and on one of our first days at our clinic, we had a patient who started seizing and was in a significant amount of pain. It turns out he had meningitis. And our little makeshift clinic was not in a position to treat him. And so I decided to lead the effort to try to persuade the local pastor to help get us some transportation and get this patient to another medical facility where we can get him better medical care. And lots of my team saying, well, you know, we've done so much, we've done as much as we could to stabilize him. And I felt rather strongly about it. And so eventually I was able to persuade the pastor, and I and a physician got into the van. We drove this guy into downtown Haiti. It's nighttime, and there are fires burning everywhere. And Haiti at nighttime, especially then, was a pretty dicey proposition. And as we're driving there, I ended up getting a phone call on the satellite phone I had, and it was the World Health Organization, who had originally told me where to go. And they were calling me back to say, our bad, they're not going to accept the guy, he's contagious. And so we were sort of, you know, stuck. I mean, the pastor hit his brakes and said, now what, Hardy? And, you know, we didn't have a good idea. And so we ended up taking that patient home. And the doctor that was with me, she's an ER doctor, and she sort of made him comfortable. And she said, you know, you might want to sort of say some words to him because he's probably not going to make it through the night. And so we got back to the clinic. And for me, it was, I can remember there was a moment of group reflection. So when you talk about reflection, Wilhelmina, we as a group decided to sort of think through what just happened. And the doctor that came with me on the van, we both realized it was an opportunity to take responsibility for the decisions that we made, because it certainly looked like we made some pretty poor decisions. And the catharsis in that moment, and the ability to sort of step back and go, if this happens again, here's how we should think through it, was really helpful for the group. It turns out the next morning, as I'm working the triage line, this same gentleman walks right up to me and greets me. And so, you know, by some miracle, he made it through the night. And so although the result ended up being a good one, I think the fact that we stopped and stepped back from the situation, and those of us who needed to take responsibility took it, and we were willing to sort of be critical about what we did, and also we saw some good things, that was a really helpful process for us for the next, you know, week that we were in Haiti. So that reflection that Wilhelmina's talked about, I think, is a big part of it, even in the group setting. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here because I know the schedule has to go on. I want to thank Ambassador Jones and Professor Reuben-Cooke. Thank you, everyone, and please, you have wonderful alums with you here this weekend. Please don't be afraid. Come up to us, have conversations, ask us about risk-taking and failure, and we look forward to learning from you. Yeah, back and forth, yeah.
I'd like to say,
Oh, I can't, I'd love to, yeah.